Welcome back to another installment of The Forum. For those of you who are watching this for the first time, let me just say two, three words about the format. We are doing the forum as a discussion forum, as the title suggests already, in order to complement articles and contributions that we publish on the Substack channel called The Cable. So if you're joining us here through YouTube, I would encourage you to also check out The Cable on Substack, where the three of us and hopefully more in the future publish contributions all centered around sort of transatlantic relations, international politics, but also mostly about what we call the crisis of the West. So today we're going to talk a lot about Donald Trump. And we're going to discuss Jason Tang's article, Everything Louder Than Everything Else. And I'm going to give Jason the floor in a minute to just sort of quickly summarize the article. And then the three of us are going to discuss the article itself, the argument presented therein. And then we're going to move from the Trump policy style to some of the actual policies that have caused some consternation over the last few weeks and months. With that, without further ado, Jason, why don't you give us a brief synopsis of your article?
So I guess the core point of the article is that like a lot of theatrics, from at least Trump's version of theatrics and politics, like stems from professional wrestling and the history of professional wrestling. I mean, theatrics and politics is nothing new, right? The first emperor of China used to have gigantic, parades and tours where he could, show off how powerful he was. Genghis Khan, Caesar, everyone. It happens in politics. But I think what is new is that like we've entered a kind of like reality TV / like pro wrestling like kind of style of politics, right? Like we've kind of moved past the sort of ironic phase of the 90s and 2000s where you just like we value authenticity, right? And whatever you say about Trump, I mean, like he's not prone to shame, and two, he's very much prone to letting you know what he thinks. And this comes kind of a shock, I think, because like we have this conception of like the president, the role office of the president as being kind of like a very kind of sophisticated, buttoned down, very like, yeah, there's a prestige in the office. Trump seems to run against that, even though the prestige probably isn't true. I mean, like the stories of Lyndon B. Johnson, Nixon basically being, an alcoholic, and like, I mean, it's always been there, right? But it's just never been out in the public in the way that it seems to be that Trump shows himself. And I think that like wrestling provides a good analogy. It's not necessarily like an analogy is not a logical argument, right? It's something that reminds you of something. And I think you can trace a lot of his like behaviors and kind of like just the way he comports himself to, yeah, like, I mean, it's just straight out of like a wrestling promo.
Okay. Yeah, that's, I think, a very good summary of a very interesting and, as I said, fun article. We have a couple of questions that we raised before we came together here. But Anthony, asking you, what do you think of the piece? Does the wrestling analogy work? Do you agree with the argument, or?
Yeah, I think when I read it and I was thinking about it, I was thinking the wrestling analogy, I think it works. I always thought of tabloids, like the way that tabloid journalism, I think they're very related. Like the tabloid, and this is also like Trump was involved in wrestling, as Jason mentions in the piece, in terms of promotions and participating and so on, but like 15 years ago. And tabloids also, like, and, I don't know about in Germany, imagine there's something, it's not, it's essentially like gossip news, but usually like there's some tabloids that are just fake, that's just ridiculous. But the celebrity tabloid journalism is stuff from like the 80s, and Trump was involved in that too. But both like wrestling, there's a lot of, I don't know if you want to say spectacle, but there's this thing about like appealing to people's emotions with spectacle, keeping their attention, and kind of like using that emotion to control the narrative, and to just keep people involved. and I think that's key to, that's key to wrestling and also to tabloids. So yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense. I mean, I wonder, and I think Jason's piece is interesting. I wonder if there's limits to the analogy, and Jason mentions at the end of the piece about like this is politics, though. Is this, does this really work to describe this? And then also, I always wonder about. I wonder how much with Trump is he? I mean, he's not a wrestler. He's a business person. So how much of this is really spectacle to make money? And I think we see this. Maybe we can talk about this too. But like, there's so many initiatives that he's doing that is just he's making money. Like what's cryptocurrency? Even look at the immigration policies. I think we'll talk about. There's so many interests competing for contracts with immigration in this administration. So this is just a game, and he wants to make money, and he's privatizing everything. And if I would just add one thing, like Wendy Brown she has these lectures. She's a professor at Berkeley, and she has these lectures about like populism. And that's one thing she mentioned. She goes, "What's going on now is that everything is becoming transactional. Like everything is being bought and sold in our political discourse, in the United States particularly. And I don't know about Europe. And with everything being bought and sold, what that means is that those who have the most amount of money, they have the most amount of power. And that's what we're living with. So.
All right. Well, I think so. Several things I really, really appreciated about the article. First of all, I think that the initial opening sort of is spot on. Everybody's talking about the actual policies, and we will do that as well. But I think it's very refreshing to talk about the style first. And I actually, because people ask me a lot about what do you think of in Germany, and what do you think about Trump, and isn't that crazy, and isn't that blah? And I usually always start by talking about his style. And it used to be already like back in the day, first time he was president, that the thing was like he would do something crazy, and then people would get very upset, and then the next week he would do something crazy, and people would get very upset and have forgotten already what happened the week before, right? And this now he seems to have perfected in a way. So I think it's crucial, and there's something very distinct about Trump, the way he's using spectacle for political purposes, and therefore I think this is in some ways really unique. And the wrestling analogy I think works really, really well. But it also works well because there's this important line where I also don't know much about wrestling, but where Jason explains like even kayfabe, is that right?
Kayfabe.
Yeah. Where you pretend like it's real, right?
Yeah.
Even that is, even when you pretend like it's real, there is also something real about it. Like there's actual pain. You cannot like fall on, from it through a table and that not hurt. You can train to do this in a way like a stuntman or something, or a wrestler, but there's still some actual real pain there. And this is something I always wonder, and I still think it makes out the appeal of Trump to a lot of the electorate, that people still have the feeling, yes, he does feel it. He feels the pain, so to speak. There's something beyond all the show and the spectacle that is sincere. So I agree with the money-making thing. That's always nice. We've seen this with other presidents. I mean, the Obamas have been very successful and after the Obama presidency. And there's something also about just the narcissistic, maybe psychology, I don't know, but I also don't know who's not a narcissist these days, or who's not being called a narcissist. But I think it's also important and missing out a part of the story if one just chalks it all up to this is all staged and sort of performance. I think Trump actually thinks he brings the golden age to America.
Yeah.
And he just thinks it's a good thing. So, but still, I wanna throw the question at you, Jason, and do you think, I mean, especially like let's think about Obama when you were summarizing the piece, I was thinking about that image, and I think there might have been a video where he's like running around the pool with a bazooka and like sort of water bazooka and shooting his little girls in a pool and joking around. I mean, this was very totally different type of spectacle, but
Yeah.
how unique do you think it is to just the Trump presidency?
I think Trump dials it up to another level in the sense that one is that like I would call him like the first real like social media president in terms of like we get like announcements like just recently we declared we bombed Iran and now it was time for peace, like, right, we got all that through True Social, right? As far as I know, he's the only living president to have dropped an F-bomb, like live in an interview, like not off script, but like, you know, just literally intentionally dropping an F-bomb. And I think that's part of like, I think part of his appeal. And I think one of the distinctions, I think, in professional wrestling, I talk a little bit about in the article about the difference between a work and a shoot. Like a work is something that's pre-planned, you know, scripted. It's something that happened. A shoot is basically when you're improvising on the fly, right? And there's always this kind of tension, like, is it a work? Is it a shoot, right? Was the Zelensky meeting, right, where he blew up on Zelensky? Was that kind of like, was that pre-planned? Was it like, you know, or was it kind of just something that happened? Like, and I think part of that's like, because everyone's debating, right? To a supporter, it's like, it's 4D chess, right? It's all part of this giant scheming plan, right? And then like to his detractors, he's like, he's literally just making stuff up as he goes, because like the man cannot hold a thought for longer than 30 seconds. Like, and some stuff we know, right? Like the Iran stuff was clearly what we would call a work, right? Like they lob a couple of missiles at Qatar, you know, and then we say, okay, everyone claims victory and we all go home, right? That's literally typical wrestling, right? Even if the heel loses, he claims victory and then the storyline continues. So
Iran, you think? Okay, I would actually think Iran was very planned, but maybe we'll get to that.
Oh, you know, I'm saying it's like it was planned. That the whole point, like their retaliation was almost equivalent to like the Soleimani retaliation, where they're like, okay, we're gonna let you know ahead of time. We're gonna lob missiles at a very, very, very well defended base, right? And just call it a day. Everybody gets to say we win, right? Israel gets to say we win. Iran gets to say we win. You know, Trump gets to say he wins, right?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, yeah. I mean, yes. Then we're moving to the actual substantive policies already, because I thought when the Iran bombing, the bunker busting happened, I was like, that was about the day when we published your article. I had scheduled a day, and I was like, I wonder how this is actually going to work, because this seemed to be so planned. And actually, I have to say, I know people are going to hate me for it, but it seemed perfectly organized and executed. It was like very impressive, no matter what you think about the morality of it, or if it has good long-term consequences. But this is something that American presidents have struggled with for the last decades, and like there seems to have been some coordination between Israel and the US, of course. Like there was like done the work beforehand, and air defenses were out, and then the bunker busting, and the whole thing was just sort of like, I told you, right, Maverick style sort of executed, and you're like, okay, and then it's kind of like over, and he gets upset at Israel. That was sort of wrestling again.
Yeah.
And then comes the F-bomb, which was actually kind of like, I mean, that seemed so intentional, because it's actually something 90% of people probably agree with.
Right.
Like they really don't know what the F they've been fighting over for the last, So, this is when I was like, this is actually a counterexample to your argument.
Right.
Actually, let's go to Anthony first. I want to hear what he thinks about this as a professor of international politics.
Well, with Iran, I was thinking when following that, how it played out. The only thing that was, I don't know, spectacle for me was Trump saying, "Oh, we're going to give him 2 weeks," and then people were like, "Okay." I remember it was like PBS, their Friday news hour. They had these people talking about the 2-week thing. And they were like, "Oh yeah, what's this mean? I don't know. 2 weeks is a long time." And then the next day they bomb Iran, right? And so I was like, you know what? That's the spectacle. That was the sleight of hand. But and this is, I can't remember the case, but this is not the first time Israel has done something that was kind of contrary to the United States. but that drew the United States into a conflict. And that ultimately this action is in the interests of Israel. And we know this. We know there's this long history of the United States supporting Israel. And Trump, during the first administration, moves moves the capital of Jerusalem and so on. This was just shows the impact of Israel's power, the lobbies and so on in DC. This is nothing. This was pretty textbook. This is not surprising for me that they did what they did. There was some circus, but pretty much this is.
Yeah, I mean, if I may, I mean, to me, it looked like it was just the perfect sort of the stars aligned for both, right? And they both had planned similar things. I mean, if you read, there's like articles and reports in Wall Street Journal of how long they have planned. The Israelis have planned the whole thing, executing all these scientists simultaneously, basically, which is like insane. And then of course the US coming and swooping in after. So I would say it was actually in the stars aligned in terms of like it was in the interest of both. All right.
I would add one thing though. The regime change discussion is, I think, the red line. And I think that's because there was some talk about regime change, and I believe Israel was saying we want regime change. And I think that's where the US puts its foot down because of Iraq. And in the U.S. will say, Trump and many, many people will say, we are not going to participate in regime change.
Right.
I'm wrong,
not directly, right? Yeah. Like if it happens,
no, they're not going to topple. Yeah, but they're not going to. They're not going to. And this is straight up domestic policy impacting international relations, like textbook. People have written books and books about this. So,
and I think it's also like. I think it demonstrates like, because again, it's more the theatrical part of it was like, hey, right, this kind of attack is something only the United States can do, right? To have stealth bombers fly from the continental U.S., drop a bomb that was specifically designed by, I think it was a Department of Threat Reduction Agency. We have a specific department entirely dedicated to like, how do we deal with like rogue nations of nuclear weapons? Right. So like if you look at it, we'd spent like 15 years developing this one specific bomb to do this one specific thing. Right. And again, it is a demonstration to say like, yes, China can lob cruise missiles. So can Israel. So can the United Kingdom. Right. But only the United States can fly bombers, halfway across the country, fake out, drop some bombs, call it a day. And that feels very Trumpian, as well as kind of like the pro wrestling, like even if it is symbolic, even if we don't do all the damage, right? We get to say, hey, look at this big thing that only we can do, right? Only I alone can do this, right?
But then, Obama kills bin Laden. That's the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same kind of like the idea that like our reach, right? Like
they made a movie out of that too. They will make a movie out of the bunker busters.
They did, yeah.
Even though
it's already there.
It is very close to Maverick, right? So the cruise missiles start the moment they cross the border. That's exactly what happened in reality now. Yeah. Well, but I think, yes, you got a very, and Anthony mentioned it, this is something for people who are not maybe familiar so much with the IR literature. It's like sort of a two-level game. And this is actually also what was interesting, complicated about this one. So two-level games is you have an audience that's domestically, that's very important for Donald Trump because they put him in power. And you have the international audience, other states, and you have to sort of balance the demands of both. And the Iran thing was very difficult, obviously, in that regard, because a large part of the Trump voters bloc is very much against foreign intervention, right? This is what he ran for. But so he seemed to have tried to really walk that fine line of being like, okay, I'm going to show you we can do it, but I show the big muscle, but then we're out again. We're not getting pulled in, and in that regard, I was like quite impressed by this one. We can talk about other policy issues where I was like, what the hell? But this one, I was like, with regard to strategic sort of behavior and military sort of strategy, it seemed almost like Thomas Schelling like wrote the script for this one, right? So you cause some pain, but you give them a way out. you don't, so Iran had the way out. They were allowed to sort of bomb the base, but told everybody in advance, like, hey, we're coming. And this way they could save some face vis-a-vis their domestic audience, and also the other Arab nations in the area, right? But so this one was impressive, I think, in some ways, surprisingly so, also, I have to say. But yes, Jason, you have something else there you want to get off your chest.
Yeah, I was just thinking like this mirrors, like, again, if you look at like a typical wrestling plot line, right? You have like the heel, which is the bad guy or the antagonist, and the baby face, which is, the protagonist, right? They both make these outlandish claims about all these horrible things they're going to do to each other. They have a match, it's inconclusive, usually because somebody cheats, somebody gets disqualified, the title doesn't really change hands. Then everybody claims victory and the storyline continues. Right, like, and then, like, even if you're not like deeply involved in politics, but you are maybe like an American who has some sort of inkling of, or is somewhat touched in the American popular culture, you've seen this story before, right? This story is like, oh, I've seen this. Like, even if you don't like analytically say like, oh, it's the same thing, you recognize sort of like the story beats, and for better or worse, that's just kind of like how we, we all think in narrative formats, right? Storytelling is core to the human condition, and I think like part of it is like, oh, okay, I recognize this story, right? Even if it doesn't line up to like what's actually happening in the background, you just recognize the way things work, right? It's just, I guess, yeah, it's like it's just part of the cultural zeitgeist.
All right. Well, yeah, it actually reminds me of this movie I recently watched, and I'm gonna like advertise it, so to speak. It's not that great actually, with Gerald Butler, Kandahar on Amazon, just came out, and there's this line, he's an MI6 spy, blah blah blah, very straightforward plot, and has to escape. Some great, you're gonna like it, Jason, because of lots of desert. At some point, the Pakistani spy agency dude says, like, please transfer me to London. It's so terrible here. But it actually looks beautiful. But Jared Butler, at some point, he's driving around trying to escape the bad guys, of course, with an Afghani translator who's actually there just to try to find the sister of his wife. And he's asking him like desperately, like, why is this all happening? And Gerald Butler says, like, well, in the past, wars were fought for spoils. Nowadays, wars are just not supposed to end at all, right? And this is kind of goes with your argument, actually, because yeah, it's sometimes maybe more important to have that narrative, to have the heel, and I still can't get it right, the terminology, the bad and the good guy. And what matters is not so much that one gets killed, because if you kill the bad guy, you also, the story ends, and maybe this is why we don't know why they don't what they're fighting over, because this is why they're fighting. It's just, it keeps going on and on and on and on. And that's my nice segue to also bring up the other audience in this 2-level game, which is the international one. And it's also, I'm gonna write a couple articles on distraction, on how policymakers are trying to distract us from the real issues. And this case obviously brought to mind that Russia and Ukraine, right? Because Trump very much hit a wall there, made huge promises. I'm going to end this in a day. We're far away from that. It doesn't look like he has much sway over Putin at all. And so this whole thing was obviously a very nice way to sort of get some credentials on the foreign policy scene. Establish himself as a tough guy without having to pick a fight with Russia, which he won't be able to win, right? Because it's mutually assured destruction. What do you think, Anthony?
About the distraction?
About anything. Yes.
Yeah, I think
Russia, Ukraine. How do you assess that?
Oh, yeah, I think there's Russia, Ukraine, there's China as well. I think the I mean, there's a lot of things to it to compare this administration with when Trump was president the first time. And I also think of North Korea. Like that's the other one. People have written about this a lot too. Is like what the problem with nuclear weapons. And you can there are a lot of people have written about this in terms of like if you get nuclear weapons, it's really hard to get you out of power, right? Look at Gaddafi in Libya. Gaddafi gave up his weapons. I don't know if he didn't have nuclear weapons. He had weapons like chemical weapons or whatever. He loses them and then he gets killed, right? He's displaced. So if Iran develops nuclear weapons, it's not so much like that would make that regime like permanent, essentially. North Korea shows that, right? And China shows that too, right? China's nuclear weapons. And so there's this fear, I think, of that's part of the discussion here. And you look at Russia as well. So, and then you mentioned Trump's the promises at the campaign. I think it's amazing. I mean, it plays maybe into elections, maybe like just the optimal time for the wrestling analogy to exist. I mean, Trump was promising everybody the moon, up till the election. He was, wars will end on day one, prices for everything will drop, and I guess I'm surprised, which I probably shouldn't be, is how people were so like taken by it. Like, I don't know if it's desperation, I'm not sure what, but like I was thinking particularly of Michigan, the state of Michigan in the United States, upper Midwest, large Arab American population. And you had cities like Dearborn, which a lot of people prior voted Democrat. They either went for the Green Party, the third party, or they voted for Trump. And after the election, like a month later, when it's becoming clear that Trump was going to continue to support Israel and not support Palestine at all, that people were like, what is going on? There's a group like Arabs for Trump, I think. And there was CNN to these interviews and they're like, what do you think? Do you regret your vote? And people were like, well, we thought things would be different. And it was like, because of the last couple of weeks of the campaign, really. But people were so distracted by it that they didn't pay attention to the past, not just past U.S. policy, but what Trump has done the first time he was in office. So there you
Jason,
go.
you want to add to this, or?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like there's like one is like yes, I mean like people don't realize like how disconnected the average American voter is, and I suppose there's like a broader question about like it's weirdly undemocratic to have like your entire foreign policy and basically your country, if you're not America, be determined by like basically a bunch of fundamentally like not necessarily 100% informed voters in Michigan and Wisconsin, but that's a separate argument. And the other point I want to make is like Trump is trying to like I mean, it's kind of glossed over. We don't really talk about it, but he also signed like a ceasefire/peace deal between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda, which is one of the Congo has just been a disaster for basically, we don't talk about it, but it's probably been the bloodiest war since World War II. And again, to tie it back to sort of the whole wrestling narrative, you have this plot line where like, the upstart hero says like, I want to like the world championship title belt, right? Senior management won't give it to him. So he pivots to a different, smaller, like intercontinental belt or whatever, or like a tag team title to kind of build his like cred so that he has the ability or build a storyline to go for it. So again, like the story is there, right? Like, so whether or not we directly like acknowledge it or just sort of implicitly recognize it, we recognize like, or at least in America, this is the story beats are not like alien to us. Right? I guess in a way that like say like anime was alien, not now, but like 90s, 2000s, kind of like a lot of like the Ghibli stuff, a lot of anime stuff was kind of like alien to like Western sentiments as far as story beats and narrative structure and that sort of stuff.
All right. Well, I think what's important, and this is kind of the anecdote, I wanted to bring up the story about my conversations here in Germany with people. And I think you have a lot of similar conversations in America. I think what comes out of this conversation and the article too is we can agree that Trump style very much resembles worldwide wrestling. And I would encourage everybody who's watching this to go to Jason's article and watch the YouTube, or click on the YouTube links and watch the Battle of the Billionaires or something. It's really wow. So we can agree that his style is yeah, and in some ways also problematic, because you also not just compare it to wrestling, you also compare it to the argument of Harry Frankfurt on bullshit, where it's like it doesn't really matter anymore whether it has anything to do with reality. It's sort of just the story is what matters. But what I have thought about a lot. So let me start with a story. Actually, I've been to sort of events the last 2 weekends, and I had a very similar conversation both times. So when we met with some friends, and everybody sort of friends we hadn't seen for a long time. And when people see me, they're like, "Oh, this is the guy who's doing the whole why Trump Transatlantica thing." So everybody's like, "Oh my God, Trump! How in the world?" And this guy is so crazy. And it's like, he is the most monstrous. And basically, we've gotten to a point where nobody really looks at particular policies or differentiates between this one action and this other one, but it's just blanket statement. If you like anything that Trump ever did, you like everything, and therefore you are evil. Vice versa, probably with people who vote for Trump. Like, if you like anything that a Democrat ever did, you're also evil for them. I mean, this is the whole question of polarization, right? But I see it more and more also in academic circles and with think tanks and experts, that basically the entire effort there is not to sort of come up with an informed judgment of something, of a policy, but it's more an effort to find ways to interpret it in a way that suits the political ideology one has beforehand, right? Anthony, you're at a university, and I'm trying to get to the academia issue, which I really want to talk about. But what do you think about that? And yes,
hard to say. I mean, I agree that there is the polarization. I wonder if, I don't know. I don't know. I struggle with the academia point because I think it's there, but I'm not sure how much it dominates universities overall. Because I feel like there's still a lot of like diversity in what's taught and also what's researched. And in within the United States. And so I think there is something in terms of the polarization society. I think you're seeing what you're seeing. And also I think in the political parties as well. Like, and this is something that's odd in the United States context, maybe, is that what we're finding is that it's virtually impossible to create a third party in the United States for a variety of reasons. And historically, it was different. But what we're seeing is it is actually possible to transform a political party. That's what Trump has done with the Republican Party and issues like trade and so on. He's really changed the party. And the question is if Democrats are going to follow suit and who would do that. And we're seeing that, like, I think there's just, there's this big legislation moving through Congress now in the United States, and Representative Tom Tillis from North Carolina voiced a little bit of opposition. Trump intimidated him, and then he said, "I'm not going to run again for re-election next year." So that kind of like purification process, purity and so on, is something that I think we're seeing in a lot of places in the United States. Now, the thing with universities, I don't know if we're seeing it exact. I just feel like there's so much going on at universities. I think there still is a lot of diversity in universities. I'm not sure if we see the same dynamics play out like we're doing with political parties and even with like social groups. Like, there's stories in the United States of people geographically moving to different places because of politics. I don't know if we're seeing that. I'm not sure about the same degree of within the universities.
I'll get back to this, come back to, because I want to push a little there,
Right.
but I want to give Jason the floor first.
Specifically,
You seem thoughtful.
yeah, I'm just thinking like part
experts
of it's
and think tanks.
yeah, part of it's like I feel like it's a function of the primary system is relatively new. Like, because prior to the primary system, what we had was basically like, the smoke-filled back rooms, right, where the party decides where the elites basically say like, okay, we're running this candidate. The primary system, you could argue, incentivizes more extreme like candidates, because the people vote in primaries, just as an example, and I live in New York City, like the mayoral primary, like I'm not a registered Democrat or Republican, so like I can't vote in the primary. So it just ends up being the case that like the most engaged voters, and generally speaking, like if you're moderate, middle of the road, you are by definition probably not super engaged or super have a super strong conviction moment or the other. And maybe that changes going forward. Maybe something happens in the primary system that changes, maybe something doesn't. I don't know.
Okay. Well, yeah, I was going more for experts and think tanks. And
I think think tanks is right.
Sort of,
I think your point on think tanks, I think, is correct. I think think tanks are funded. They have a political purpose. I agree with that we're seeing more maybe ideologically driven proposals and platforms and legislation from think tanks. I don't know if we're seeing the same thing at the universities.
Yeah. I mean,
or we're seeing think tanks getting involved in universities. That's something too. We're seeing like increasingly private money getting involved with, trying to capture elements of public universities. And that's been going on for decades. And now it's still going on.
Okay, well, I would actually disagree with this to some point. And when I went, what I meant when I said we're going to talk about the academia issue is sort of the Trump policies towards like fighting or getting back or curtailing the influence of Harvard and elite universities in the US. It's now also not just elite universities. The president of UVA just resigned over DEI policies.
Right.
But I get the impression that, again, it's nowadays, it's the moment, I mean, when you have, and I had the conversations with those two also very intelligent people on those two parties I attended over the last 2 weeks, when they straight up actually asked me, "You're not a Trump supporter." And I was like, "No, I'm not a Trump supporter. We're trying to like understand why someone like Trump becomes president, because it signifies something that's wrong at a deeper level, and we want to figure out what that is, because it's not just happening in the United States. We do have the same situation in Germany and in much of Western Europe." But when I then sort of talk in more detail with these people, and this, I think personal conversations are much more conducive to that, then quickly they have to throw up the hand and be like, "Well, yeah, that's true. Okay, and that may be too." Right? But the initial thing is like, are you Trump or not? And it's pretty crazy. And my impression is that a lot of experts, media, and sort of think tank people in particular are sort of catering to that, obviously, because they all want to be, everybody wants to be an influencer. Everybody wants to be important, ask and whatever on CNN. So you try to sort of give them what they want. The problem is those people are actually, and this is something Jason mentioned in his article about politics in general, those people actually are sometimes very influential, right? And when they're supposed to assess and sort of analyze, provide differentiated judgments on policies, and then they do this out of a very sort of ideological corner, it also ends up giving us bad policies, right? Because policymakers rely on it. Actually, probably not as much as we all think, because I did talk to some very high-level, high-ranking experts who are like, yeah, I go in there and I tell them everything, and they just don't care. They just still listen to it. They just do something else. But, and here's my point on universities, and we should use that maybe as the last point of the conversation. But Donald Trump has been very aggressive with universities and has put up a lot of roadblocks and put a lot of pressure on institutions of higher education. International students are basically having a very hard time, if to go abroad now. I was sort of telling myself like, oh, how lucky I was that I've completed my studies in the U.S. before he came to power. So it's pretty scary in a serious way for a lot of people. But I'm gonna throw out or play devil's advocate here. 2 points. First, this kind of happened before Trump came to power with Mr. Ackman over the issue of pro-Palestinian protests, right? That there was basically big money and influence used in order to pressure University of Pennsylvania and Harvard to get rid of their presidents. MIT was not fired, I think. So that happened before Trump. And I think it shows something very problematic about the American system of higher education. And I think in Germany we have similar tendencies, but it's not as bad. There's too much money there. And there's so much money there. And I think that therefore your argument is maybe not entirely correct that think tanks are more ideologically biased because they receive money. If you look at how much money Harvard and all these institutions of higher education receive from big donors, I don't see a big difference. I mean, Transatlantica, we're not an NGO because we would be depending on government funds, and we don't do corporate stuff for that reason. But I don't see that universities are that much better.
Most private and public institutions. I was like Harvard and Columbia are both private, so they're, and I don't know. I mean, yeah, in terms of endowments and so on, and so I would imagine they're more beholden to private interests. Now, in public institutions, but the thing is, what you're describing, a lot of public institutions are also being targeted by the current administration, in terms of research. University of Wisconsin-Madison, and they're not hiring people. Virginia, the one that you mentioned, was a public institution. They're financing. I'm not sure about Virginia particularly, but I know like in Wisconsin and Minnesota, the upper Midwestern states where I'm from, but there has been more privatization, but it's been because of students. Like your tuition dollars pays for those institutions in addition to taxpayer dollars from yearly budgets. And there are endowments, but for particular programs. It's a different funding structure at Harvard and Columbia. There's still great punching bags for the current administration and for right-wing, you want to say, and this is where the polarization stuff maybe comes in, is that this is not new at all. Like the anti-intellectualism stuff, like the fighting against the universities, the elites, saying that they're out of touch, and like, where's our conservative ideas? And then you have these quite explicit initiatives, Hillsdale College in Michigan, and in the whole state of Florida now, essentially a form of affirmative action for conservative voices and policies, positions in universities. Then that's, I think, is irony of this whole debate, is that we have essentially right-wing leaders saying we need essentially our voices guaranteed. We need quotas for right-wing voices in institutions, which is, we don't have that for, I mean, that's kind of bizarre, but that's what I see going on, especially with the publicly funded institution.
Jason.
Oh, I guess if I were to play devil's advocate, the idea being that, like, look, if you accept federal money, you are, by obligation, like, the federal government should have some sort of say in terms of like how the money is spent. I think that's like the administration's argument, and I also think that increasingly, like, you're going to see more and more schools adopt like the University of Chicago approach, which is just basically say like, look, we are not taking stances on these things, right? We're just going to be a form of debate. Right. Our job here is not to tell you that Israel's good, Israel's bad, Palestine's good, Palestine's bad. Our job is to say, like, you can have free and open debate. That's it. Right. And I think increasingly you're going to see universities move towards that model. And I guess the one point I would it's sort of tangentially related, but like, I think Trump's unique political genius is to recognize the importance of like how basically like to bring about the rational term, like the heel drives the heat, right? The heel controls the narrative. The bad guy controls the narrative. Right, because traditionally our presidents don't like to be viewed as kind of like boorish, bad-tempered, people. They want to feel presidential. Like Trump has no problem at all playing the bad guy, right? Just going in and just saying horrible things, or just being like sort of smash mouth sort of thing, right? Like, and he revels in it, right? And he understands it basically like he gets to control the narrative. He gets to control the heat, right? You know, like the Batman needs Joker. You know, Superman needs Lex Luthor, right? Like, and that's kind of like how, like, and maybe there's a counter movement towards that. I don't know, but like, it's all kind of like this part of like this like American love of drama.
Here, can I add something to this?
Yeah.
Because I think there's a couple of things here. I think Jason's points are interesting because I think there's one question too is like how much of this about Trump is actually just really Trump? Like Trump is like I don't know. I mean, you don't want to these great men in history arguments, but like I think about comparing Trump to others who may have tried to be like him and haven't worked. Like I was thinking of when you mentioned the universities tying this in, is like remember Milo? What's his last name? Remember Milo?
Yeah.
So remember he would go on these tours. Charlie Kirk does it now, but like Milo, whatever, who would go on these tours and he would go to universities and there'd be fights and there would be, you know, protests and people get so mad. And the university response to that often, I believe, was to say, we don't like this because it makes us look bad. And if we look bad, maybe our funding will get cut. Maybe we won't get grant. It's all about money. And that's, I think we've been seeing this increasing, like how universities are being privatized. That's like a major, it wasn't about speech, really. I don't think in any of those, sometimes it's represented as speech, but it was really about creating a safe space and not having conflict on campuses. And Milo was doing all this stuff, and then what happens? He has this like controversy, and he's now forgotten because he's not as good as being Trump as Trump is, right? That's part of it. And so I was thinking like that's part of the discussion here is Trump is unique, it appears, but then the university element too is I think there's something else going on with universities. I think there's deep problems in higher education. I'm not sure if it's polarization exactly. I think it's like this constant preoccupation or worry, I should say, with funding streams, which can involve the federal government, with donors, the increasing privatization where students more and more are being, going into debt. All that creates different dynamics in universities, which makes like basically it's like don't rock the boat, don't cause any controversies. They don't want to be sued. That's one thing. All universities, they hate being sued by their students. Like that's the Charlie Kirk goes on campuses around the country. University administrators lose their minds because they're like, what's if somebody says something and then we're going to get sued? And then what happens? You lose your money.
All right. Well, well, the Ohio State University, where I got my PhD, and they're going to sue me probably right now. They have really powerful lawyers. I actually got $400 million to build their hospital, and it's now the Wexner whatever hospital, right? So the publicly funded state schools also get a lot of private donations, which again opens them up to a lot of pressure. And we see that. I agree with you completely that there's a big problem in academia, and I've said that, I thought that, didn't say it publicly, for the last 10 years. This is not, it's not going to survive the way that we know it, or when we went to college. This is not going to happen anymore. When Jason says like, well, the University of Chicago, and we both went to Chicago, that might be the model for the future. That would be terrific. I'm skeptical that that's going to happen. It actually is the model, and it's actually built on the sort of German model of liberal education, and we don't have that anymore in Germany, which is a real problem in my opinion, because I think education is more than just getting the skills to make a lot of money. It's also to form character, something we should talk about, or will talk about down the road. But I'm worried that it's not going to be about just the pursuit of truth through open debate, which seems, I think everybody's sort of still model of what academia should be. Universities, people at universities are trying to find, even though that's a term you can almost not use at a university anymore, trying to find truth, right? Nowadays, I think a lot of people you're shaking your head too, so in approval, that's not necessarily the case anymore. That's maybe also not a terrible thing. But yes, the system definitely has a lot of problems. And one problem, and we've seen that in the book, in interviews from, and even confirmed by a lot of professors who actually were pretty much on the left. The left has dominated higher education, not just in the US, also in Germany, and by a lot. Like, I mean, we try to talk about why Trump, and just because the name Trump was there, it was like, no, we can't have you here and talk about this, right? Even though, again, the idea of the book is like, we need to figure out what is really driving this whole thing in order to prevent something like Trump again in the future. But people, and we have, it happens to us again and again, that people are like, oh, so you like Trump? And we're like, no, there's a why and it's a question mark, but okay. But I think universities, and there's one brief story. One of the people I talked about in the last 2 weeks was like giving me an example of a university somewhere in the United States where you had a conversation, and the people were like, well, can't we come to Germany and work there? And we've seen the stories about scholars in the US going, like Timothy Snyder, so going to Canada. And I had to kind of laugh. I was like, I'm sorry, but like Timothy Snyder just went there if they paid him enough money. And then that person here in Germany had to admit, who's also a professor, had to admit, like, well, yeah, when I told them how much they would be making here, they were like, never mind. Right? So, and this is, and I think, again, this is one of the sort of case studies of the crisis of the West that I would like to do with you guys down the road. Academia, the university system, the production of knowledge, that already is a terrible term, the production of knowledge. But it's sort of, it's where you really see a lot of these processes that sort of put the West in crisis come together, right? Just as with the healthcare system or with food and farming, agriculture, and all of that stuff. But I think this is a discussion we leave for the future. And I have another couple points here. And one important one is obviously immigration. And as far as Anthony informed me, we're going to talk about that too in the future. That's right.
Yeah, we'll have a piece about that soon.
Yes, and I'm very much looking forward to it. So for whoever has made it till the end of this recording, yes, the idea of the forum is that we don't always agree. This is why I sort of brought this point up in the end. We don't always agree on a lot of things, though we actually do agree on, I think, the majority of things. And I think actually that's a reflection of society in general. If you talk to people and you get past the first, like, are you pro-Trump? And you master that hurdle and are like, no, then most people can still have a very, very decent conversation and are very reasonable. But it just works better when you do that in person. For now, I want to thank especially Jason for this, once again, really fun article. Anthony for taking time out of your very busy schedule for, again, the viewers. And we'll see you next time.